further west. Let's go to John Berman, who's standing by in Miami Beach. John, you know, we talked about this earlier today with Chris Cuomo, but it can be so deceptive if you haven't been through one of these hurricanes before, and frankly, no one's been through a hurricane this size, but it can be so deceptive when you look at, you know, the weather for most of the day here in Fort Myers. You know, it's been hot. The sun's been out at times, sometimes just behind the clouds. Haven't really seen a lot of rain. But as we saw, you know, Bill Weir was just talking about in Key Largo, it's like somebody flips a switch and all of a sudden the rain is just torrential.
Yeah, it can change so fast, Anderson. Right here in Miami where we are, it's windy. I mean, the wind is now fairly sustained and fairly strong, 30 to 40 miles an hour, I say. Not yet at the point where it is dangerous for the first responders to still be out, but it is very, very windy now. Not a lot of people out on the streets here by any stretch of the imagination in Miami. You know, more than 600,000 people were under mandatory evacuations in Miami-Dade County, the largest evacuation this county has ever seen. And while maybe now they are not expected to bear the brunt of this storm, officials are pleading with people to still take it seriously, pleading with them, don't go home. If you've evacuated, don't go home, because we don't know exactly what's going to get here. The storm could wobble, and even if the storm doesn't wobble, there's going to be hurricane force winds here almost for sure in the Miami area, and storm surge as well, Anderson. You know, maybe not the 10 to 15 feet that they're fearing where you are on the West Coast, which sounds terrifying, but 3 feet, maybe up to 6 feet in some areas. In particular concern, you can see behind me right now, there's the causeway. There's a bridge out to Miami Beach. Miami Beach is particularly low-lying. It's one of these barrier islands, mandatory evacuations over that whole island. That has been a cause of particular concern now the entire run-up to Hurricane Irma making impact. Our Kyung La is out on Miami Beach, one of the few people, hopefully, still out on Miami Beach. Kyung, what are you seeing out there?
Well, we're seeing the same sort of winds out here, sustained winds now, and we're just starting to hear from the Miami Beach Fire Department that they're responding to some calls of fallen trees, trying to get through some of that. And the reason why is that the winds are picking up. You can see in the trees here, you can see that palm tree over there. Some of the palm fronds have broken off. And then take a look down there. It's a branch of the tree, but this is what we're beginning to see here. So wind is a concern. The other concern here, and that's something you see over here. The businesses are concerned about the wind, but also the storm surge. It's the storm surge here because it is low-lying that the Miami Beach Police Department has now said if you are out and about, whether it's foot traffic, car traffic, if you have not evacuated, and this is an area under mandatory evacuation, if you are out and about between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m., this evening, the overnight hours, you will be subject to arrest. They want to try to keep people off the streets. A storm surge of 5 to 10 feet here could mean that you drown. And so that's why we're seeing the Miami Beach Police Department taking that extraordinary measure, telling people to simply get out of the way. John?
It makes so much sense, Kyung, and we hope they are paying attention, because to storm surge, there's no defense against storm surge rather than just getting out of the way. Go inland. You don't need to evacuate out of the state of Florida. Just move inland to safer, slightly higher ground. And we hope on both coasts now that people are paying attention to that warning. Storm surge, the real concern from Hurricane Irma, as it has now moved past Cuba, very close to making that bend, battering the Keys, and then up into the Florida Peninsula. CNN's live coverage of Hurricane Irma continues right after a quick break.
Interaction with land has brought the peak winds down a little bit, but I don't want people to focus on that because the hazards from Irma are just now arriving through the Florida Keys and South Florida. These outer rain bands are beginning to arrive, so conditions are deteriorating now. And we expect Irma to re-strengthen as it moves out over these very warm waters in the Florida Straits. It's going to have about 12 or maybe even 18 hours over the water before it reaches the Keys, and then perhaps even a little more time over water after it passes the Keys before it finally moves inland somewhere along the west coast of Florida during the late in the day on Sunday or Sunday night. So a very dangerous situation, particularly for the Keys and for the Florida west coast, all the way from the Tampa Bay area southward to Naples. They could see the core of the major hurricane And as you were just talking about that life-threatening storm surge, the Gulf Coast of Florida is particularly sensitive to storm surge. It's very high inundation values that can extend quite a ways inland. So that's a big concern of ours today.
The topography of the water across southwest Florida, the bathymetry or underwater topography, is different on the southwest side and on the east side. Tell us about how that will affect surge even into the Everglades, Doctor.
Right, yes. The bathymetry on the coastal shelf on the Gulf side is very shallow. So as you walk out into the water, the water doesn't get deep very fast. So all that water that's being pushed by the hurricane, so as Irma might come up like this, the northwesterly winds on the backside of it are going to drive that water, and it piles up, and it can go really far inland here in the Naples area. It can go up these rivers and creeks near Fort Myers and up into the bays. So it can affect millions of people are at risk of life-threatening storm surge in these areas. There still is a significant storm surge risk on the southeast coast as well, particularly in Miami-Dade County along the west side of Biscayne Bay, and as well as in the Florida Keys. They're all at risk of this life-threatening surge event.
Let's shift our attention from Boca down to Miami and even to Homestead. What are the new updates for that as the storm has, let's say, shifted 20 miles to the west? What are your thought processes there?
Well, the surge threat is still there. We could still see 5 to 10 feet of inundation all the way from Boca down around the southwest southern tip of the peninsula. Now, on the East Coast, as you mentioned, the storm surge threat doesn't extend as far inland, especially in Palm Beach and Broward counties. But here in Miami-Dade, it goes inland a lot farther along Biscayne Bay. So there's lots of people at risk that have been asked to evacuate for storm surge. And that storm surge threat is going to creep northward along the coast of the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast of Florida as we go through Sunday and even into Monday.
I have not many seconds left. I am a little bit concerned, Doctor, that we flood the Everglades with 12 feet of water, and Miami, let's say West Kendall, can flood from the backside. Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there is the potential for that. That's generally for a slower moving storm that would be a biggest threat for that type of flooding. But there's going to be a lot of water with the storm. There's going to be a lot of rainfall. So there's going to be a lot of flooding problems just in general in the Florida Peninsula, either from storm surge and or the combination of very heavy rain. So everybody's going to want to keep an eye out for that.
Give us an update on what it's looking like.
It is looking like the storm is now moving offshore in Cuba. Great news for the people in Cuba, but now the storm is going to re-intensify in the area, the water between Cuba and Florida, or the Florida Keys. It's called the Florida Straits. 10 to 15 foot on top of land storm surge right where you are, and that's the threat right now. That number went up at the 11 o'clock advisory. We have hurricane warnings all the way to Jacksonville, so this is now going to move up along the spine of Florida. There's the center of the eye moving away from land. It is now able to breathe again. It's going to use that warm water in the Florida Straits to get stronger. We're going to see band after band across parts of Florida. That red box right there, that's a tornado watch box. Not only will you see wind, every storm that comes in can spin. Just spin enough. I mean, just a water spout coming on shore can do damage because water spouts can be 100 miles per hour.
Here from Fort
Not
Myers,
like we're going to
Florida.
see, though, for
just
tomorrow.
Starting to get some wind moving a little bit here in Fort Myers. Frankly, it's been a very deceptive day, as we were talking about earlier with John Berman. The sun was shining. It was very hot. You know, I was putting on, and other people were putting on sunscreen as they were standing outside here. But it is getting a little bit cooler now, and definitely one of these bands of the storm, as we saw with Drew Griffin, who's not too far away at an arena where several thousand people are seeking shelter. Big rain out there. The rain has not yet hit this area of Fort Myers. We'll continue to watch it very closely. I'm joined on the phone by Senator Bill Nelson from the state of Florida. Senator Nelson, as you watch this storm approach your state, I'm wondering, you know, you've seen a lot of storms. What do you think of this one and the track that it's taking thus far?
Well, we saw 48 hours ago that it was starting to shift west. So now, 48 hours later, it's not an East Coast storm. It's going to be a West Coast storm. And the fact that you're there in Fort Myers, the real threat, other than the Florida Keys, which is going to get it hit hard, and if it got to Cat 5 on the Florida Keys, that could give some structural damage to the 7 Mile Bridge. But that's a whole set of other problems. But coming up the west coast, if it moves out into the Gulf and parallels the coast, that's the worst of all possible situations, because the counterclockwise rotation takes the water and runs it up the bays like Charlotte Harbor and Tampa Bay. And once, Anderson, it gets up in the bays, there's no place for it to go. So it walls up and it becomes a huge, huge storm surge.
Right. At this point, I mean, they're talking about for Tampa Bay estimates of 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. Of course, depending on the wind, you have waves on top of that. And even here, Fort Myers could be 10 to 15 feet. I mean, Senator, for people who are living in a one-level house, that I mean, a 15-foot storm surge, that covers a first floor of a house.
Exactly. And then if the storm surge comes at high tide, you just add that much more water.
You know, in terms, we've seen, I mean, I remember back in 2004 covering Hurricane Charlie, and I was talking to the mayor here in Fort Myers. Charlie was on the same track, essentially coming up this river. You know, it had an adjustment of about 4 degrees, and of course, hit Punta Gorda, which wasn't initially what people expected it to do. I remember, I think I was in Tampa for it. I ended up driving to Punta Gorda. Even now, this storm could still move. Even slight changes in degrees make a huge, huge difference.
It could, but you got to give a shout out to the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center and NOAA. All of their assets, they're much more accurate now in their predictions of the path and the intensity since Hurricane Charlie. But you're right, Anderson. Hurricane Charlie was going up the west coast, and all of a sudden it took a right hook and went right up Charlotte Harbor. Ground zero was Punta Gorda, and that was a big surprise. There'd been a lot of people that had evacuated from Tampa to come down to stay in the Holiday Inn in Punta Gorda, and that ended up being ground zero.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody who had evacuated from Miami Beach, was staying in Tampa. I got a text from them this morning saying, where should I go? Should I go back to Miami Beach? Because now Tampa seems to be possibly worse off than Miami was supposed to be. Are you concerned about people getting to shelters? You know, buses here in Fort Myers were supposed to stop at 3 o'clock. We've seen a long line outside the arena where our correspondent has been. It seems like everybody's going to be able to get into that arena, but it seems like there's a lot of people who decided to ride out the storm and then woke up this morning and realized, wait a minute, this storm has moved west. We're now directly in its sights.
That's precisely what's happened. And you're not only getting to locations for shelters now. I saw it. I just came from Tampa, from the Hillsborough County Emergency Operations Center. The traffic on Interstate 4 going east is significantly picked up. So that's exactly what people are doing, like your friend that you just mentioned. They had evacuated to the West Coast. Now they're moving off the West Coast back to the east.
Yeah, because when I drove here, obviously going west from Miami this morning, there was virtually no traffic heading back to Miami. But as you say now, that's definitely changed. Senator, I appreciate talking to you. We'll talk to you, obviously, in the days ahead. Another short break, but our coverage continues in a moment.
Notice the map. We're going to see the storm move right on up across parts of the Florida Keys at 1:40. Right now, the center of the cone, because the cone is pretty close now. We're less than 20 hours away. We're probably going to be somewhere between Key West and Big Pine Key. It may go to the west of Key West, and that would be terrible for Key West, because then you would be on the wrong side, the dirty side, the worst side of the eye, the same place, Anderson, that you're going to be. Look at the radar summary. This is the future radar. By 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the eye wall over Key West. And by later on in the afternoon, the eye wall right over you, with wind speeds in excess of 130 miles per hour, and that storm surge being deadly. Water kills more than the wind kills in a hurricane. You need to be out of that water, away from the water. I mean, Chris Cuomo's been talking about it all day, how it's been coming up in Miami because the water in the air is just pouring on shore here. Well, tomorrow, the water will be pouring into southwestern Florida.
But what are you seeing, and what does it add to your expectations?
The eye now of Irma has moved offshore of Cuba. Our Patrick Ottman right there. So he's finally going to get away from that purple band. And why is it purple and not red anymore? Because that's the next level of coldness on the satellite. The storms are getting stronger around the eye, and the eye will begin to get deeper in pressure, lower in pressure, and the storm will continue to strengthen as it is right now. A Hurricane Hunter aircraft is in the plane trying to get there. The Hurricane Hunters will probably be another hour before they actually locate the center and tell us what the new pressure is. Fort Myers, your wind gust will be 136. Now, this isn't all at the same time. This is storm total. As it comes across Key West, our winds are going to be 129. You get up to Orlando, 123. Now, I remember what Charlie Jean Francis did across parts of central Florida because my parents lost the roof twice that year. And this is going to take off roofs again, not just shingles. This will be a devastating storm for central Florida, Tampa, Fort Myers, Naples, all the way down to Key West. Here is the latest European model. Now, the new one is out 24 hours. So we're still waiting for the rest of the run to happen. It's the model that models the atmosphere. But what I just watched at the 24-hour model run, the eye, the center of the eye, is west of Key West, just by a little bit, like by 3 miles, just over Sunset Key. That will put Summerland, Coppet, that will put Big Pine Key, that will put Shark Key in the eye wall. Likely 140-mile-per-hour winds, and of course Key West, because I just said that. Fort Myers, Naples, 100-mile-per-hour winds, at least for you. Just told you, 125 possible. And then where people are evacuating to, Atlanta, Athens, and Macon, winds there will be 75 miles per hour. It's the surge again for you in Miami. For Chris, 4 to 6. For you, Anderson, I'm afraid almost 10 to 15 feet above normal dry ground. Don't worry about the tides back and forth. Above normal dry ground. If your house is less than that above sea level, you need to go. Because not only will it be, or could it be 15 feet, there could be 20-foot waves on top of that. Time to go. Anderson, you too.
All right, Chad, thank you very much. And I just want to...
Tropical winds, when they're going to really start to get hurricane force winds, just what do the next 24 hours look like?
Every time, Anderson, a squall goes by, an outer band, the winds are going to pick up. And every hour a squall goes by, that pickup is going to be greater than the hour before. So I think the tropical storm force winds are already hitting Marathon, Big Pine, all the way down to Key West. That's already a given. I've already seen a gust to 60 at the Marathon airport. The storm is off now the coast of Cuba. It's gaining strength. We will eventually begin to see hurricane force winds tomorrow afternoon in Miami. This is the map now of the brand new European model, and I'll get to the track in a second. These are the max winds that we're going to see over the entire storm, not just 1 minute, 1 hour, or whatever. The entire storm. Your max wind in Key West is going to be 138. Naples, 132. Fort Myers, 136. Orlando, because the storm has shifted even more toward Tampa. Now you're not over 100, you're 94. Not that you can tell the difference, but it's better. 116 for Tampa, losing shingles, losing roofing boards, an awful lot of damage in Tampa that they weren't expecting because the models, as they try to simplify the atmosphere earlier this week, had it like this, and then like this, and then like this. We're waiting for the turn, and it never happened. And now we're over Key West, just to the west possibly of you, and then making landfall just south of Sarasota. Landfall is going to be a long process, because the eye wall will be on Florida's coast for a long time tomorrow afternoon, doing significant damage from Fort Myers all the way through Venice and all the way into Tampa Bay. This is the model as it's going to be moving on up to the north. There's your latest track. This now, I will get rid of this. This now is what the European model has been